clear steps to take when you want to learn a new skill makes everything easier, right? If you want to learn fashion sewing, I can help you. I have a blueprint. A couple videos ago, I don't know if you saw the video a couple days ago, I shared with you my blueprint to learn fashion sewing. How to get started, like breaking it down. What do you do? Where do you start? So many people say, I don't know where to start. I say, if you want to stay off the struggle bus, you start with the fundamentals, the foundation, and really spend some time there and learn the basics, especially with sewing. It's like learning to play guitar and musical instruments. You really have to get those fundamentals down before you can move on to reading music and going through there. There's a process, and a lot of people just want to jump into it and make a big crazy fashion design. But you'll end up on the struggle bus if you do that. So in my blueprint, a couple videos ago, I talked about starting, like figuring out what it is you want to learn to sew, why, and then researching, like going to a fabric store. Actually, I took you on a tour. In case you don't have one close by you, I have a video. I don't know if you saw that. That was some of your homeworks if you did see it. Just what's in a fabric store. If you go in there, you might get a little overwhelmed. There's a lot of gadgets and then a lot of fabric. It's a little overwhelming, but there's purposes for all of it. So, by the way, I'm Chanel. I'm a fashion designer, costume designer, and now I own a school in North Carolina where I've taught thousands of kids and adults how to sew. I started the school for kids, just thinking I wanted to hang out with kids and teach them to sew, and found that I had just as many adults that wanted to learn. I kind of didn't think of that. But I started my sewing love when I was a kid in home ec, and I turned it into careers. I actually used to make wedding gowns. I had a design studio in Pacific Palisades, California, and that was down by the beach. And I didn't go to the beach very often, but I had done. But I could smell it. I then became a fashion designer for soap opera stars, and then the whole Hollywood crowd, and then I was doing gowns for the Oscars and the Emmys and fun stuff like that. So I turned my sewing love, actually this is a jumpsuit that I have behind me there. That's one of my favorite little projects. That was a Partridge Family bus inspired from. So if you're old enough to know the Partridge Family was, if not, look it up, because it was a cool show from the 70s. So these are some gowns that I designed, and then I ended up designing a whole line of gowns and went through burnout actually, and was like, what can I do with the skills I have and turn it into another career? And I was like, wow, what about costume design? Whole different world. So I did, let me see, I had some videos on some of my movies, costume designing. I did Without a Paddle, Nature's Calling, and actually this was one of my first movies. It's called Duty Dating. This was a wedding gown that I designed and then made for the lead actress in there, and this was her, what's that, maid of honor, bridal, I don't know. So I turned my whole sewing skills into several different careers from sewing. I actually went into fashion sewing just for my own self. Loved making all my own clothes. I had my whole wardrobe was just stuff that I made. I used to go to the shopping when I was a kid and go, I can make that. But I love fashion sewing, and right now I'm actually been starting to sew more for myself. I love to make skirts, and I'm finding that my closet now is getting fuller of things that I've made myself, and I love it. It's because I like to do little original pieces. So thank you, by the way, for all the comments and from the in your emails. I love seeing that you guys are out there sewing creative things. So on my web page for the fashion sewing, I have this sketch that I did of a young lady at a sewing machine, and she's trying to, this is how some of my students feel. They want to be here, but here's like week 1 of them learning to sew, and they realize that they have all these things to learn, and then they can jump the wall over there, like learning the sewing tools. We did that in the first video. Actually, the second video, we learned to thread the machine. Now think of the machine. Machine does not make things for you. It's just simply a tool to sew seams. It's really just like 1% of the whole sewing skill. Sewing is about putting pattern pieces together. Like if you want to do quilting and crafts and stuff, that's more squares and pieces, but fashion goes around your body, has to be comfortable. You have, I actually have some pieces here. I'm going to show you what, like a sleeve and a pattern. This is just one type of sleeve, looks like this. It has this curve. It gets sewn on the underseam here. Then this is called the cap, and it goes into a sleeve here. Here is another type of sleeve right here. This one has a big dart in it right here. It's like a dart, and then it has also like sewing, learning about notches. Notches are the map to put pieces together. You're matching up notches like that. So here's another funny sleeve shape. Then there's here's a part of a jacket. This is a strange piece. So sewing is about oh, I love this one. This is a collar. This is an easy collar. It's actually fold, and then it crunches and goes around your neck kind of thing. The pattern was this one. It says easy too. Easy, and then it's a little jacket with all different versions. So that's really a fun little pattern. But patterns in sewing they're odd shapes. Actually, I had the little instructions out here too. Right here. So this is the pattern for that one pattern showed you, and these are the shapes right here. Then you're looking into the cutting of things. And then you have your markers, cutting markers, and learning how to cut. On the blueprint here, I said, so we went over what's the best machine. I talked about that in our last video. And then you're moving on to sewing simple projects, and then also learning about fabrics and stuff. That's key to sewing, because there's so many different fabrics out there that you gotta, like, what's good for what. And a lot of patterns too will say suggested fabrics on here, but you gotta know what it is. Like it says chambray. What's chambray? Gingham. That's a scissor shear. But what's a challis? What's a challis? I don't know. But studying fabrics, learning all that. There's a lot to know in fashion sewing, so you want to just start out gently and then take it project by project. One thing I like to start with is seam allowances. So we got, do you guys know what a seam allowance is? I think I had a pattern piece. I have a mess on my table here. Seam allowances are, helps you with seam allowances. These are a measurement gauge, 2 different types of measurement gauges. And this is a lot of inches. There's a 6-inch ruler, and then there's fractions like 1/2 inch, 3/8, 1/4 inch, that kind of thing. Most of your seam allowances are 5/8 of an inch. I find a lot of people don't know where 5/8 of an inch is. It's right here. If it was starting from here to the edge of that, it's just, there's 8/8 in an inch. 5/8 is 5/8 of those. I, believe it or not, went to apply for design school, gave them my portfolio and everything. I went to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles, and I thought I was a shoo-in to get into it because I was really good at sewing, patterns, everything. By the time, what was I, 19 when I went in there. I started sewing around 11, and I knew patterns inside out. And I actually had gone to another vocational school 2 years before that, and I literally couldn't get in. I did get in, but because I couldn't pass the fractions test. I'm like, fractions? Really? You're gonna hold me back because of fractions? And then I studied up because I was not letting that stop me. These gotta be crazy. And then I figured out why. I spent, most of their classes were all about pattern drafting. And that was back in the 80s when they really drafted patterns. Now you got some computer aided pattern making and stuff might be a little easier, but I don't know, everything with computers, you still have to know all the basics to kind of understand it and go, do it. But I had to know, like, move it out 1/4 of an inch, move it out 1/2 an inch, and then add half over here and 1/4 over here and 1/8 of an inch over here, and then even 1/16. So they even do like 1/16. That's 1/16 is 1/2 of an eighth, and that eighth is really tiny. So, but I actually have I have a whole YouTube series on sew bits. It's called Sew Bits, and it's all little increments of learning sewing techniques on a video, and I try to keep them around 5 minutes long. But this was my one of my last ones, Sew Bit number 21, and it's on what is wearing ease and design ease. So I get a lot of questions. I want to learn how to sew a pattern, or like how to alter a pattern, or how to pull them out and measure what my size is versus the pattern size. And then a lot of it is just like, there's a formula, a real simple formula, and it involves just like 2.5 or 3 inch fractions, and then 1 inch kind of thing. And then you just have to know where to add the little increments, because you don't just add to the side seam and make it fit. You have to add a little here, a little there, because it goes around your body. So simple formula. Fractions all the time. So I find once you can kind of really hone in on what fractions are, you can have a lot easier time in sewing. And if you go to design school, really want to do that too. So I'm going to show you real quick a demonstration on what a seam allowance is. So in sewing, you have 2 pieces of fabric that are different shapes, or it can be all different shapes, and you have to join them together. This happens to just be a simple square or rectangle shape. But I'm going to take the raw edges here, match up the raw edges, and then I'm going to mark a 5/8 inch seam allowance. And we use 5/8 because that is typically what the commercial patterns use. In sewing production in the garment houses, they use a 1/2 an inch seam allowance, which would be right here. 1/2 an inch is, there's 8/8 in an inch, so you'd be 4/8. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4/8 is a 1/2 an inch. We're going to do 5/8 because I like to get my students used to the 5/8. This is what a 5/8 inch seam allowance will look like. This is the raw edge here, and then you have from the raw edge to this edge here, and you mark it, and then you have your seam. This is a seam. It looks like this on the inside. There's your seam. This is the seam allowance. It's the fabric that extends past here. It's important because it helps the garment hang right, and it gives the allowance of some sturdiness in there. If you actually sewed it really close to the edge, this whole stitch would just pop out. So you have to have some kind of allowance in there. So how you make a 5/8 inch seam allowance is you'd put this little tab. The reason for this measurement gauge is just to keep your space. This little tab moves up and down like this. If you want 1 inch, you put it right here. You have from here to the end 1 inch. 5/8 is right here. It's the 1/8 of an inch past the half, and you put it right there. And then you would mark, you put it on the raw edge here, and that's marking where you're going to sew, like that. If you want to do 1 inch, just put it on the 1 inch mark right here. Put this on the raw edge here, and then I'm going to be making 1 inch mark. That'll be a 1 inch seam allowance. They use that in couture clothes a lot. Then sometimes you might find that your pattern calls for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Sometimes they'll do that if they got a little small space. Then you're going to put it on the 1/4, which is just 2/8. It's much smaller. And then you would mark the 1/4 inch right there. You can actually, if you wanted to in the beginning, connect your dots. You can take a ruler, oops, that was sloppy, and connect your dots. I'm using a white tailor's chalk, which is actually not chalk. It's made out of wax. And this actually just irons right off. So I would actually now go and sew this, and I'll take you to the sewing machine and show you how to sew it. Okay, so what you do is you just start right here, and where your needle is here, and it just goes, you just want to just sew straight on that line. I don't know if you've ever seen these. These are seam guides. They're good if you have a basic machine, but if you have one that's electronic, this is a big magnet here, and kind of ruins your electronics, so don't use these if they're, but this right here, this is actually on your machine, is called the throat plate, and it has all these little marks right here. So you actually put it like, I could put it where, I'm going to sew a 1-inch seam allowance, so I'm going to put it right there, and you can actually follow along. So you get that right there, where the 1 inch is. So I can sew it right here. I'm going to reverse stitch it here. Sew a 1-inch seam allowance. And if you don't have it, you still do follow the mark. Reverse stitch it at both, and then that locks, the reverse stitch locks the seam down. So there's your 1-inch seam allowance, and you would just press that out, your 1-inch seam allowance. And let's do your 5/8 here, reverse stitch, there's the 5/8, the most common. And then you can see it gets, there's your 5/8 seam allowance. So now the 1/4-inch seam allowance, I like to use the edge of this presser foot as my guide, because if you actually just put this edge right, start sewing right here, that actually gives you a 1/4 inch. So I'm just looking at it right here. Right here, you can just put that right there. That sews 1/4 inch right there. So it's just a little bit of fractions. So there's all your seam allowances. And this is your most typical. You want it to be nice and straight like this. That takes a little bit. I make it look easy, but it takes a little bit of time to get it straight, and that's just where you want to practice on that. And get good at your seam allowances, and then you're on to the races. Okay, now that you got your seam allowance figured out, what is a seam allowance? Very basic. One of the most basic things you can do, and I know most of my students all do this, I'd say almost all of them, especially the kids, they make pillows. Simple pillows. Teaches you right sides together, sewing it, pivoting, marking the seam allowances, clipping the corners, flipping it inside out. Very basic. You'll find a lot of fashion sewing starts with these very basics. Then from there, you can go on to harder pillows. Like this was a pillow I made from an old t-shirt. Right here is just more like a motif. I put trim in here. I put like ribbon enclosed in the seams right here, and like that, just from an old scrap of fabric. So going on to harder pillows, I think, like I had said in my past videos, I used to make frogs. They were stuffed frogs, so they were definitely 3-dimensional shapes. They were so cute. Oh my gosh. So pillows are just a simple, great place to start. Also, you can do really custom-made pillows. I made some for my friend long ago, and it gave me such joy that they were just so beautiful. I took different trims and made them all unique, and she still has them. She always tells me too. It's funny, but it just gave me like I don't know, such a great feeling. Like I made these, and they were just it's rewarding. So sewing can be. It's just for some reason I see my students look in the mirrors and go, I made this. It's like, I know, because you can just take it, like, you take this was fabric yesterday, and now it's on my body, you know, so it's like, it's great. But I have a class here for you real quick, how to make pillows included in this video. It's down below. You can just click on that, and I'll teach you real quick how to make a pillow like that. But so where do you start after pillows? You might want to start on some easy patterns. I like these will say easy to sew. Easy to sew. I love these pants. I've got to make these. There's look for things with no zipper to start with. Elastic is always good. In my class, that that I teach in my school and my new online class, we start with the A-line basic skirt. It's got elastic. It teaches you casings, folding under things, a lot about pressing, how to do hems. So just kind of work your way up into basics, and then you go on to things. If you want to stay off the struggle bus. If you want to stay on the bus, there's some cute guy on the bus, and you want to stay on there, go for it. Get some patterns that say advanced, and then probably never finish them. But there's also this kind of pattern that says learn to sew. I use this in my intermediate class. I like the learn to sews because they have more detailed instructions in them. But like this one has darts, facings, zippers, all kinds of things that are a little hard for someone just coming out of beginner. So just look for the easy to sew, but look for, like, try not to go with the zipper route, and look in the instructions. You can just pull those pieces out, and if they look a little crazy complicated, don't get it. Also, fabrics. When you learn to sew, you'll be going into fabrics. You want to look at wovens, like these. You'll be seeing, like, okay, it's got metallic thread. It's just a simple woven fabric, really easy to work with. Flannels stick together, so those are like probably the easiest one to do. This I found in the quilting section. I just love doing trims and stuff on there. This is a vintage fabric that I found in my stash. It's actually, it's 100% silk, and it must be, I'm guessing it's from the 60s or 70s. And but learning about fibers and how, like, silks are different than polyesters, and then just the different weaves. There's like a challis weave. There's those are like loopy threads. Then there's just your basic wovens, and there's twill weaves. There's a lot of different weaves, a lot of different fibers. There's a lot going on. If you go to design school, you want to pay attention to those fabric classes, because key to fashion design. This is one of my favorite fabrics. It's what do they call it? Sapima, right here. You can see it. World's Finest Cottons, and I've been making a lot of things out of this because I love to work with wovens. They're just easier. One thing too, a new fashion sewer needs to know about fabric grain lines. That's actually in our blueprint here too, fabric grain lines, because fabric, you really kind of need to know a little bit about how it's made, because you want it to hang right. If it's kind of woppy all over the place, that means it wasn't on the grain, and no matter how great a sewer you are, it's not going to work out really well. So fabric grain line, key to fashion design. If you ever watch Project Runway or anything, you'll see them talking about that on there. Also, on my sheet here over the wall is learning the pattern shapes, sewing engineering, all about fabric, learning fit. The more you sew, the more your eye gets trained to proportions and fit, how things fit. I love this part. I can actually just look at somebody wearing a shape and know, like, that's a little, too tight there, too loose here, hangs a little longer there, and your eye just gets trained to shape. It's like, for instance, like this guy right here, basic nice suit, but is he wearing this? Like some guys will just put on a suit like this and then it's a suit. It should fit. But you want it to look like this. What a big difference. So the more you sew, your eyes just get trained to pattern fit. And a lot of stylists were born out of people who could sew because their eyes just get trained that way. Like, for instance, this lady here. She started out just a simple jacket and a skirt. And then what if you tailored it and got it to fit right and shortened it, and then you're working with different proportions. This one I love. This one, I don't know. This was on a website for, like, beware of clothes coming out of China, that you think you're getting this, because they will actually say, look what I have here for you, but you get that. And no amount of altering will get you that, by the way. But I don't know, when you know how to sew, you can kind of start telling that. Here's another real simple one. Very matronly looking outfit, and we just made it fit. Very basic, like that. I love this part. I found this on Pinterest. Just seeing gaps in clothes. I love, like, the lumpy shoulders. The sleeves. This one's definitely, the sleeve is off grain here, or it's not set in right. There's like a technique and certain way you set in a sleeve so that the fabric hangs straight. This one is the sleeve dipping in like that. I see that a lot. I watch a lot of the guys wearing suits on the late night shows, and Jimmy Kimmel dresses really good. His suits are like, they're like, what's that, sheet metal. They hang so good. His stylist is wonderful. Lumpy shoulders, sleeve. I think I already showed you that one. Then I love the hems too, like they dipping in. Right now this is popular, baggy pants, but when you get those things tailored and just to fit just right, the whole look looks like that. Also, when you're sewing too, I just came across these vintage patterns. This 50-cent pattern. Nowadays they're about 20 bucks. Although you can go to a lot of coupons, always 40% off at Joann's. Sometimes you get these, I'll stock up on these Singer ones and Butter ones. They'll have a $1.99 special. Like if you want to make corsets, this is for an advanced sewer. Then they have these retro type patterns. They're original 1951 design. They kind of make it a little bit easier to sew because things were a little harder to sew back then because everybody could sew. Not say everybody, but people could really sew back in the 40s and 50s because they weren't buying new clothes because the war was going on, and they were upcycling and remaking old clothes, so their sewing skills were really good. And if you wanted to stay in style, you had to have sewing skills. But so a lot of people knew how to sew, so the instructions were a little just kind of do this real quick. But so then they think they made them into what we can do. I love going through pattern books and looking at these beautiful patterns you can make. Like this one looks so much fun. I think this even said easy on it. But Vogue patterns, they're easy for people to know how to sew pretty well, by the way. So I wouldn't start with Vogue patterns right away. I would start with some, like Simplicities are really good. The New Looks are, I think they're from Simplicity. You can even get men's patterns like this. I love this shirt, this splicing shirt right here. And then you can even make hats like that, men's fedoras. And I love this one little girl. Even if you want to make, I have a student who makes her little 5-year-old dresses, but look at this little couture bubble dress. I love it. But there's so many things you could do with sewing, and then getting really unique fabric. You'd have stuff that nobody else has, and it's just so rewarding to be able to make things yourself. So if you want to go deeper into sewing, I have a new online class coming out. It's the class I've been teaching for over 10 years. I don't even know how many thousands of people I have taught. I can't even believe it. But I know my summer camps, I have at least 100, 150 kids. So 10 years of that's 1,000 just in kids. And then I have classes year round, so thousands of kids. So I had this one basic sewing class that I've been asked many times to, like, can you open up a school in my town? And I'm like, well, no. When I first opened up Future Fashion Designers, I wanted to do franchising, but I quickly kind of found that not everybody can teach sewing, and I couldn't be everywhere, and I still was costume designing and going to Los Angeles and Atlanta and working on movies, and that's really where my heart was. I still need to feed my creativity, so I was just sewing, and I've been getting this online class out for a while, and it's harder to put it on video and kind of get there. So I finally have it done, and I'm going to be sharing with you how to get involved in that sewing online class and walk you step through step if you want to learn fashion sewing, and do it the right way. Stay off the struggle bus, and don't jump in too fast. Most people, I still go through beginner, like I want to make a wedding gown. So I'm like, you can't jump in there too fast. Just give yourself a break. I know this, and also you're never too old to learn. I heard this NFL player, when he retired, he went to medical school and became a doctor. So he's probably still young when he, retired, but still, life's a journey. You're constantly learning all the way. So I have a lot of students, I say, I'm, too old. I had a 26-year-old with that. I should have learned. I'm like, no, you're never too old or too young. You should be at least 8. my classes, to learn how to sew. So there's even an 80-year-old woman I heard about who wanted to, always in her whole life wanted to be a geologist, and went to school, became a geologist. So learning fashion sewing takes some time, like anything, and you want to do it the right way. So if you really want it, jump in and get started. Don't be like, well, I should have learned this or like that. But I have a philosophy of everyday effort, learning in little increments. And as long as you're involved in it every day, I even have a chart on my wall that says, did I work on this today? Did I work on this today? Just like 10, 15 minutes. Did I do something on it today? So I was involved in it. And then you find you just learn. It's amazing, like what you can learn in little chunks along the way instead of all. You just think you got to learn it all at once. But enough of my soapbox. Anyway, I have another video coming out for you, and I'll share with you my new online beginner sewing class coming out that's geared for fashion sewing. And until then, make that pillow, do the fabric tour, check out some things, see, kind of really mark down what it is you want to learn in sewing. What's the goal, like that, and then keep that goal in front of you, and it all can be yours. I'll see you in the next video.